featuring the industry's top leaders. This is the Executive Edge with Joe McClung.
Hello, FloodGate family. Welcome to this edition of Executive Edge. And I am absolutely ecstatic to have Dave Dunkel, former CEO, current chairman of Kforce, here to join us talking about winning with culture. I know Dave's going to have some incredible insight here. So Dave, thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having us. As I was leaving, my wife, Melissa, said, who could possibly be interested in anything that you'd have to say now that you've stepped down and you're retired? I said, I think there's at least one or two.
I think there's going to be a lot more than one or two. You've done some incredible things. And I've gotten the chance to get to know you and understand Kforce and what you've built. But for those who don't, can you give us a quick synopsis?
Well, let me give you a little bit of background.
Yeah.
Grew up in a lower middle class family in East Greenwich, Rhode Island. Voted least likely to succeed in my high school.
That was actually a thing?
No, it wasn't. But if there had been such an award, I would have won it.
Got it.
So I went off to college at a junior college. Had no idea what I was going to do. Took a few accounting courses. Came home, told my dad. I said, Dad, I think I'm going to be an accountant. And he almost fell over. He said, my son's going to amount to something. I can't believe it. So went on and got a bachelor's in accounting, CPA, MBA in finance at Babson College in Boston. Went to work for what's now PricewaterhouseCoopers. Spent 3 years there and enjoyed auditing. But to be honest with you, I knew that wasn't going to be a career. And so one day I was working, of course, if you know auditing, you're working overtime. And I got a phone call. I was talking to my dad, and he told me he was getting ready to drive to fly to Tampa to look into opening up an office. And at the time, it was just a search firm doing finance and technology. And I hung up from him and then called him back, and I said, Dad, what about me to run the office? And you know, the words of inspiration and encouragement that came out of his mouth at that time just lifted me up when he said, you have got to be kidding me. So we went together, we sat down, talked about it, went down together, and I ended up opening an office here for what at the time was known as Romac, which was two guys named Ray Roy and Frank McCabe. Romac came from that, and the original logo was a griffin, which came off a Lowenbrau bottle, which was a beer yes. that when they were sitting there in the bar and talking about what they were going to do, they started this. They were both IBM executives, and they had started this recruiting firm. So we are rooted firmly in beer as a history.
There you go. You got the Lowenbrau.
You got the Lowenbrau Griffin. So yes. The Griffin has been retired, and we actually went through a name change from Romac to Romac International, then ultimately Kforce, and I can give you a little bit of history of that. But so I moved here in 1980. We became the largest franchise group within 3 years. By 1994, we had put together a plan to basically take what was then Romac was to become Kforce as an organization to roll it all up and take it public. There were a number of elderly shareholders that were looking for liquidity. And so it was at that time that the market was really receptive to staffing firms, and we were one of the fastest growing firms. So on August 15th, actually, of 1995, what became Kforce became a publicly traded entity. Split adjusted price was $3 and an eighth.
Wow.
3 1/8. So if you had bought Kforce on August 15th of 1995, the split adjusted price of 3 1/8, and today it's 65 or something, you would have done pretty well.
Yeah, that'd be a good return.
Now I wish I had held all of my stock, but I didn't do that either.
Exactly.
So that's a little bit of a history. We grew from basically zero when I first got there to when we were public at about 45 million. I stepped down as CEO in January of 22, and when I left, we were doing about 1.7 billion.
Wow.
So I am living proof that nepotism pays. So if anyone can get into a nepotism gig, go for it. It's a wonderful way to.
But it was a big $0 company. When
it was a $0 company.
Yeah.
When I stepped in, we were doing, I think, 100,000. My dad's office was doing 100,000. So, but one of the fun things that I got to do is to see him standing next to me as the ROMC symbol came up on the floor of Prudential Securities. So, he got to go home. And I had to go to work. Mm-hmm. And so that became the fun part in the World Challenge. So that's a little bit of a history.
No, that's incredible. Taking from 100,000 to 1.7 billion. That's something to be proud of. But I know one of the things you and I have talked about is building the culture that made that happen. Yeah. So my question when people talk about winning cultures, how do you define that? What's a winning culture?
Winning is a really personal thing. A lot of people think, well, how do I win? Mm-hmm. And some recognize it's how do we win? And I would say to you that a winning culture ultimately is one where all of the constituents win. The customers win, the employees win, the owners win, the leaders win. Mm-hmm. Everybody comes together, and winning is really defined by what the outcome is that you are delivering for your customers and for your people. Yeah. So I saw one time, I think it was at Home Depot, where they had the inverted pyramid, where they had the CEO on the bottom and the customers and the employees on top. And I remember Herb Kelleher, now deceased at Southwest Airlines, he said, the first thing we focus on is taking care of our people, because our people take care of our customers. Mm. So I think a winning culture has everything to do with who you define as the winners.
Yeah.
And the winners are customers, they're your employees. It's not I win and you lose, because I get all of the benefit of it. So building a winning culture really starts with the heart of the leader. And is the leader's heart right with putting themselves in a position to place other interests ahead of their own? Wow. And so initially when I went into the business, the way I saw people was I saw them as a means to be able to achieve what I wanted to achieve. And then I became much more focused and learned that actually my role was to assist them in achieving their goals. And they became the priority in developing the people. And once I learned that, everything kind of shifted in the culture.
Was there a moment in time where you had that realization?
Yeah, there was. It was kind of an interesting time for anybody who was born back in 2000 or alive in 2000. When we went public between 1995 and 2000, our stock went from split adjusted 308 to 33. And all these analysts were writing reports. Dunkel's one of the best CEOs in the staffing industry. And I said, man, I've arrived. Look at what I've done. Mm-hmm. And then along comes the dot-com bust, and the stock drops to $1.78. And then the research reports come out and they say he's the worst CEO in the staffing industry. So, there's a proverb that says pride comes before the fall. Mm-hmm. Pride came before the fall. My pride got crushed and I was done. I was like, okay, I see it. And so one day I was in my library, I was praying, and I said, you know what? Naked I came into the world, and naked I'll leave it.
Right.
I just said, I'm going back. I pushed everything into the center of the table. I said, okay, God, it's all yours. What do you want me to do with it now? And literally I heard, okay, now I can use you.
Right.
So off I went and changed my priorities, learned how to really effectively work as a leader, developing the people. And from that point forward, everything just took off. Wasn't linear, but we had a lot of success. And as I finished up my career, I can look back and say it was a mic drop moment. We had the highest stock price, highest revenue we hit when I stepped aside. And I said, Lord, thank you for an incredible journey. It was for me personally and for the people that are now running the firm, it's just been a great ride.
That's incredible. No, I love that concept of who's winning. Really defining who's winning of a culture and having the people win and thereby the customers win, like Herb Kelleher said. If that's who you're considering winning, it's that culture is going to keep going. And it's always amazing sometimes, they puts that challenge in front of us to kind of open our eyes. And reduce that pride, whether it's the Icarus effect, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
right? Those moments where we go, I don't got this,
No.
and so that's a great lesson there. And you guys grew fast, and especially in that moment. So how do you maintain that culture, that attitude of seeing others win during growth? How do you do that?
We had a couple of different interesting eras in there. One, the very first period we were growing through substantially through acquisition. So I think we did 30-something acquisitions because we had to build a national platform from which to operate. So we needed a geographical presence, and we needed scale to be able to serve our large customers, the Fortune 500. So we grew substantially through acquisition. So we did a really, really big deal in 1998. We actually bought a company that was bigger than us. It was a company called Source Services. Some of you may have even heard it was called Source CDP, Source Finance at the time. Because we were faster growing, we had a higher market cap. I went in and met with their board. Their board was getting ready to replace their CEO, and they said, "We'll sell the business to you, and then you can be CEO of both." And so we went from at that moment, I think we were about 350. We went to $1 billion overnight.
Wow.
And it just broke all of our systems. Broke the culture, broke the systems, the back office couldn't keep up. And it was a lesson. I was actually on my way to England to do another deal for a European company. And while I was over there, I kind of got the message, if I do this, it's going to kill us. So withdrew, backed off, and really focused at that point on reestablishing the culture, rebuilding the infrastructure, which was necessary to be able to just do the fundamental things right, from reporting, serving clients, paying customers, or paying our consultants, and so forth. So we had a few years of kind of rebuilding that.
Yeah.
And the culture definitely got diluted through acquisitions. We saw that and made the determination that we were going to be highly selective in any acquisitions that we did in the future. And so for that window of time, in order to build scale, we did a number of acquisitions that dropped off substantially. And then by 2006, we stopped doing acquisitions at all in the staffing and consulting space. We did one final in the government services space in 2008, and so we haven't done anything since then in 2016 or 2024, so 16 years. So our focus was on reestablishing the culture, reinforcing the culture, which took a little bit of time because it gets diluted when you bring people in with different philosophies, particularly people at a leadership level. So for us, we learned a lesson in there that growing too fast and growing by acquisition has a negative impact on the culture. So fortunately, we were able to recover it, identified the leaders that were going to reestablish that culture, reinforced it, and today our culture is the healthiest it's ever been.
That's great. And you bring up a really good point. The acquisitions and integrations of different cultures, is hard to do. And I mean, I think of that with the Gallup, engagement scores. You mentioned not having the resources, not having the tools, the fundamentals. That's one of the things that, they identify as not having the resources to do my job will crush a culture. So investing in making sure they have the ability to win with the right tools, slowing down, making sure the cake settles, and then building back up. I think it's
hard to do because you don't want to do it. I mean,
you don't want to slow down. You got
opportunities to serve clients. You got opportunities to grow, and you're like, oh, this is great. So it really took some discipline to step back and say, we can't do this. We got to stop. And we got to go back and really focus on building the infrastructure and reestablishing the culture.
And I also heard you say is identifying the leaders whose culture doesn't align, right? And making sure that they're on that same page, because no matter what you say from the up top, if the leaders that are delivering the message one-on-one aren't believing it.
Well, there was a period where I became an expert at firing people. There were people who didn't see the way that the way that we saw the culture evolving. And so I had a number of people who were basically resisting the change. And I said, well, I'm going to make it clear to you. This isn't optional. So you can either get on board or you can depart. And unfortunately for them, most of them ended up departing because they said, now we know better. So, okay, there's the door.
Yeah.
And so the willingness to do that sent a clear message to everyone else that now, even though we've experienced the growth, that no, we're going to reestablish the culture and we're committed to it. And there are no prima donnas. There's no sacred cows. If you're not willing to get on board with the culture, sorry, you're going to have to take the exit.
You're right. You set it up. Here's what it is. These are non-negotiables that we've got to maintain. And it's okay if you don't want to, but it's not okay here. Yep. So I think that's a really good point. That brings me to a question I have, especially in the world we lived in of talent. Right? Is culture nature or is it nurture, or how do you balance those two? Yeah,
It's a great question. I think personally that values are well established in people prior to them coming out into the workforce. It's how they're brought up. It's what they've experienced. And so we hire to a large degree based on values, based on character, based on philosophy. You can teach skill if you've got those fundamental characteristics. You can't teach integrity. You can't teach those things because people either have it or they don't. And so to me, I'm going to start with raw material, and then I'll teach them the skills necessary. So it's a little bit of nature and it's a little bit of nurture. And I've seen people who came in who ordinarily would look at their background and say, this person really doesn't have the kind of skill set necessary to be successful. And I've seen them be phenomenally successful through all of the things that you would look for, like persistence. There's a great book called Grit.
No, I loved it. Angela Duckworth, she's amazing.
Loved it.
Yep.
And we have that philosophy embedded in our selection process. And people who are willing to do that, those are the winners, I think. And then we can teach the other things that are necessary. And then we have a high level of accountability, and we have a great reward system. So our philosophy is to pay above market for above market performance and below market for below market performance. So by definition, what we do is we reinforce performance because people will self-select out if they can't perform at the high level.
Right.
So
because they'll be below market.
Because they're going to be below market. There's the door.
Yeah.
So Jack Welch years ago, they used to do at GE, they used to do the 10% headcount cut every year. They cut the bottom 10% as a reinforcement to everyone else to say, hey, look, we have high standards and you need to perform at those standards. So we didn't adopt that specifically, but we were always looking to prune those who were not going to be able to make that level of performance.
Yeah, no, I love the way you talk about it's hiring for some character, right? Yep. So there is that nature. You got to have that fundamental, that grit, that ability to take ownership. Those type of things that got to be innate in their culture, and then from there be able to train them and perpetuate that, and then reinforce it through a very transparent performance process, right? That shows, hey, the winners, they're going to be above market, they're going to be well celebrated, well compensated, well supported, and the ones that are underperforming, it cuts both ways, right? It's a performance-based culture.
Sales is the highest paid hard work and the lowest paid easy work.
Yeah, that's right.
As my old partner Howard Sutter always said, he goes, if people were paid on effort rather than results, ditch diggers would be the highest paid people in the world.
This is true. I've dug some holes, and it is.
I have too.
It is a little harder.
I didn't get paid for it very well, though.
Yeah,
that's why I went into sales.
Now, outside of Kforce, you've got a chance to work with a lot of great companies and companies of all sizes, help them with talent, get to know their executives. Is there someone else that you can think of that really exemplifies creating and using culture to win?
It's a really interesting question. And I have seen at various points in time different organizations manifest those kinds of characteristics. And there have been a lot of books written on it. Good to Great was written by Tom Peters years ago. I think it was Good to Great. You've seen a number of books that have been written on it. What's interesting is most of those companies didn't sustain it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so when I look around now, the companies that I admired when I first started, the IBMs and those guys, they weren't able to sustain it.
Right.
And the question is why? Why couldn't they do it? And I attribute that primarily to leadership. Every company is going to experience different challenges during their lifetime. So you're going to have whole markets displaced. Product lines are going to be displaced. IBM, when I started, was the premier IBM mainframe manufacturer, and that was it.
They were it.
You bought IBM.
Go Big Blue.
Go Big Blue. You bought IBM and you were safe. Well, along comes the PC, and my watch has more power than the mainframe when I started. So the market changed, and there was a guy named Lou Gerstner who came in, had to rescue IBM. He completely redid it. When he was being interviewed by the analysts, they asked him a question. They said, "So what's your strategy?" He goes, "The last thing we need right now is a strategy." He goes, "We need to figure out who we are, what we want to be." So we're not there yet. He came back and basically reestablished IBM as a service organization and said, mainframes are going to be a commodity. Computing power is going to be a commodity. We need to do value-added services. So he repositioned, actually rescued IBM. And IBM today is predominantly a software and services company.
Yeah.
If you watch the Masters, I pulled out my shirt for you today.
Mm-hmm.
If you watch the Masters, you saw IBM advertising all of their AI tools and whatnot. And so they've had to change through different leaders in order for them to be successful. So I just picked them as one organization. But most that I've seen don't really make it because they don't have an effective leadership transition plan. They don't properly groom and select their succession, and they aren't willing to take the risks when the market shifts and entire segments are disintermediated. Are they willing to make the tough decisions? And most that I watch don't. Most of them don't.
Yeah.
There's another factor, which is that private equity has completely disrupted the market now. Private equities come in, and the companies that are public companies today you see many of them are being bought out through private equity, being taken through these efficiency drills, basically, and then taken back out again. So building great companies for the long term, you don't see that much anymore.
It's a little. It's definitely
it's
harder.
changed.
Right. Yeah. But what I did like about the IBM, the answer was not what's our strategy. Who are we?
Who are we?
Well, how do we define ourselves? What's our back to that core? What's important? What are we going to do? And I reflect back to that classic Kodak scenario where if they saw themselves as an imaging company, they would have been great, but they saw themselves as a film company, and they were gone. Right?
The digital camera came along.
Right, exactly. So who you are, how do you define yourself, is a key thing. And then having the right leaders and continuity of leadership. We've all seen when those leaders change one to the other, and you get this tack, where everyone's busy just moving the lines instead of determining where they're going to go. It's easy to get off track.
I remember when my son, this is a number of years ago, we were on vacation. He pulls out this thing. And I said, "What the heck is that?" He goes, "It's an iPod." I said, "What's an iPod?" He said, "Well, it's," he goes, "you put music in here and you can just listen to music." And I said, "Who the heck would want one of those things?" Right? And then out comes the iPhone. And so one of the guys in our office had one who was showing it to me, and it's got a camera in it. And I was like, what the heck would somebody want a camera in their phone for? That doesn't make any sense. I got this beautiful Nikon camera, and why would you want a camera in your phone? Doesn't make any sense. And they sit there, and I remember a statement my dad made many years ago. He goes, "You can only half listen to your customers because they can only see what they can see about what they might want now. The true visionaries anticipate what they will want."
Right.
And so when you look at an Apple and what Steve Jobs did, and even what they continue to do well, which is to continue to innovate. And so, now I'm probably one of the most prolific picture-taking iPhone guys there is, and sending them around to everybody.
Yeah.
And, but things that I never would have anticipated. So for every business, the willingness to challenge what you're doing, innovate, to deliver services, to deliver value to customers, even things that they may not have even anticipated that they would want, becomes a really cool thing. And you can test it. So it doesn't mean that every idea is a good idea, but it does mean that some of them may actually be the new product that's going to allow you to be successful. And so, what's that new product? At Kforce, we've innovated a number of times. Some worked, some didn't.
Yeah.
And the ones that didn't, we exited. The ones that did are now contributing a substantial part of our revenue stream. So the willingness to take risk and innovate is really important.
Well, and I think if you start back to the beginning of your comment of thinking about who's winning, and if you think about the customer winning, I think it's a little easier to innovate because it's not what you do, it's what they need. Right. And if that always constantly, what do you really need? How do I make your world better? And thinking about not what their said needs, but their unsaid needs to make them better. That's where the innovation and design comes from, right?
Yeah. Now you've got Chat GPT out there doing work for everybody.
Right. Exactly.
So what's that going to do? And what's AI going to do to the average person's job? I saw recently a friend of mine sent me a picture of this robot that was delivering his breakfast in a restaurant over in Pinellas County. And they mapped the floor of the restaurant with all the different tables.
Yeah.
And you've probably seen it. I haven't seen it, but he sends this thing to me, and there's got 4 levels on it, and each one of their meals is on these different levels. And the robot was sent out to their table because it knew to go to table 68. People just took it off, and the thing went back in again.
Yeah.
So they cut the number of people that they would have from 10 down to 4 people, and you could order off a kiosk. And so you look at that and say, those things continue, the innovation continues to happen. So the question is, what impact does that have to our customer? What impact does that have to our business?
Yeah, constantly challenging that status quo because it's going to, nothing stays the same. And speaking of change and challenge status quo, you built a business, right? You built a culture. People came in, but you still had to maintain that. What about a lot of people listening to this are going to be coming into a business where they have to actually change a bad culture? What should they do?
So the leader starts and establishes the culture. And as we talked earlier, it's not optional. So it's a new day. This is the way things are going to be. I'm asking you to sign up to get on board. Give us this chance. If you don't feel that you can do that, then I would encourage you to identify another opportunity that better suits what fits you from a cultural standpoint. Because this is where we're going, and if you want to be on this team, then these are the things that you're going to have to do to stay here. You've got to establish that clearly. If you start to compromise up front, then automatically your culture is going to be diluted and you're going to lose. It's tough talk.
Yeah. No, knowing who you are, sticking to it, figuring out you've got your direction, your North Star. This is where the boat's heading. Are you in? Are you out?
Right.
And no matter if they're last year's top performer, being willing to walk away, even if it risks revenue in the short term.
Yep. You've got to think long term. You've got to build a culture with a view towards the long term.
That's great. Dave, I can't thank you enough for sharing how culture has an impact and you use it to win. I mean, you won with Kforce, taking from 100,000 to 1.7 billion by focusing on the customer, focusing on your people that can support the customer and asking what their needs are, innovating, having a great transition plan, and for sharing not just your insights, but also some lessons you learned along the way from other business leaders. I know everyone's gained a lot there, Dave, so thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm a blessed man, and I'm fortunate to know you guys. So keep up the great work at FloodGate.
Thank you.